Thank you for joining us for our Inspire series. My name is Collin Young. I'm a senior consultant at Bridge Innovate. We are a network of business strategists, consultants, and designers that team up with you to spark distinctive design, courageous leadership, and agile change to transform your organization for good and growth. The goal of our Inspire series is really to share valuable insights and lessons to support your innovation journey, whatever that may be. And today's program that we'll be covering here today is around tips for leading virtual meetings. So I'll go ahead and jump in. I made introduction for those who have been able to jump in previously, or those who are just joining as well. We do have a chat feature to introduce yourselves right now. Your chat will go to Mary Kim on my team, and she's serving as kind of our host for the Zoom technology in our webinar today. So if you're able to chat to everyone, you can use that menu bar down at either the top or the bottom of your Zoom window. Go ahead and take an opportunity, if you have a chance, to type in your name and organization to let us know who all is joining today. And please, at any point during our time, feel free to use this feature to share any comments or ask any questions that you might have throughout the session. During this session itself, we do have two requests for you guys who are joining us. We would love to be able to see your face if you're able to, and if you have video, to be able to turn that on. We will talk a little bit about that later today as well, but we love the use of video in all of our Zoom calls and webinars that we have. The other request that we have is we would ask that you remain muted as to eliminate any background noise during our webinar. It helps us to get some clean audio and to get through our tight program that we have for today. So I'll go ahead and get us started as we jump in. What I want to do is actually use a Zoom poll. So this is a feature that's built into Zoom, and I may need to ask Mary to help me open that up as well. But I want to ask you guys, using this Zoom poll, you'll actually see a window pop up to really just rate your experience with remote working so far. We'll just have a 1 to 5 scale and spend some time identifying where you would say your experience with remote working has been. Submit that response in there, and in a moment, Mary will actually be able to share our results that we've captured really quickly in just a short amount of time. So I'll give just a little bit of time for us to go through and submit the poll, and when it's ready, I'll ask Mary to open up and share the results for us.
The poll results.
Okay, we are not seeing the poll results yet. Might have to close and reopen.
Going to screenshot just in case, and I'll just see if I can do this.
There we go.
Okay, perfect.
Perfect. All right, so we're seeing some relatively good experiences so far. This is a great way for us to really quickly get some input along the way as we go through asking these questions using a technology or tool that's already built into this technology here. We have a pretty brief agenda here of what we want to talk about. You'll see that we'll be spending our time primarily focusing in on these three sort of high-level areas. We'll begin discussing at a high level what I like to call kind of remote officing. And then we'll dig into a little bit more detail about some of the key tools that we've seen in leading virtual meetings. And then we'll actually conclude our time today with a test drive to explore some of these tools that we've shared with you previously. So let's go ahead and get started. When we think about remote officing, we know that engagement and productivity really go hand in hand, particularly when we feel comfortable in a space where we're officing. We're able to make a much smoother transition to the space that is new to work in. Many times we see that connection is critical to managing our change. We've seen in our own work, particularly as we work with organizations that are trying to roll out a change or really a new solution, that we have to be both mindful of the rational and the emotional components of change. This is a new way of working, so we have to kind of be considerate of that. So once we unpack how this new approach is going to shift our behavior, we're able to really dig into the tools that will help us along the way. As I'm sure you guys are aware and know, people communicate a lot with their expressions as much as they do with their words. So as I asked you guys to turn on your video, it's something that is very simple but very powerful when you're meeting and working together, and we really see that as a great opportunity. One of the other things that we've seen as well, particularly for us to utilize our time effectively, is setting really a high-level cadence, a way for your team to be able to connect in, even if it's just a 10-minute morning huddle. We've been having huddles with our team just to check in and see how things are going, and facilitating those opportunities, even if it's sort of water cooler time, anything to really create those connections there. There's a recent article by McKinsey on remote teaming that talked about it, how a leading insurance company actually adopted some agile practices across its teams, using daily and weekly rituals of check-ins, some sprint planning and review sessions to really help them work in this new format here. Now, we know every office has kind of its own feel and even processes and tools, but today what we want to do is spend some time talking about the tools and approaches that we have found to work well for our team. And now I'm actually going to introduce another tool that we really like to use called Poll Everywhere. So in a moment, the screen that you'll have here is asking you to submit a response. This is a little bit different than the Zoom poll. You can use your cell phone to text and respond. But I wanted to ask the question of when we think about what do you see as the best parts of working collaboratively? And as you join in, whether going onto a web browser and logging into pollev.com/bridge I595 or texting that same code to 22333 to join, and just text in your response or type in your response, and we'll actually see that pop up on this screen here. All right, and as you see, we already have some responses that are starting to pop up here, the learning the diverse perspectives. And this is just one of our tools to be able to really articulate that, sharing, learning perspectives, problem solving, all of these things that are starting to surface here that allow us to really capture what you're seeing as best parts of working collaboratively. So now that we've had a chance to hear a little bit about what you're seeing as working collaboratively, we're gonna spend a little bit of time digging into what we see as some of the key tools to help leading virtual meetings. The first one that we want to talk about here is the importance of meeting design. We know that preparation is essential when it comes to leading effective virtual meetings. Knowing how, what, and when really drives up both productivity and engagement for your team. Another area that we want to look at is some of the nuances of meeting facilitation, particularly in the virtual setting. You may have noticed that virtual meetings operate a little bit differently than your typical in-person meeting. So we'll spend some time talking through what it looks like to guide your team through the highs and lows of remote connection. Another area that we want to talk about as well is maximizing your technology. So Tools are easy to come by. There's a lot of them that are out there. Some people recommending and really standing by specific tools, but what's really more important is connecting what works best to your team and the way that you work. And so spending some time to really dig into that. And the last one that I want to talk about here is the power of collaboration. So even though teaming up may look differently, the output doesn't have to look differently. So encouraging collaboration even in some different formats can really help us work and continue to move forward. So the first thing I want to talk about here is meeting design. So you might have seen quite a few tips and things that you've heard, maybe posts that have come up, but these are some of the things that we found to be really important and valuable when we're considering how do I prepare for a great meeting. A lot of the times the questions that we ask are really thinking about how many people are going to be there. That really affects how we structure and plan the meeting. And particularly even when we're not operating all remote and we have some people still together, how dispersed are your participants? I see we have someone who's all the way in the UK who's joining us. So we have people who are joining at different times and how that affects the meeting and the structures that we have set up as well. That's really critical. Another area as well is to consider what can be accomplished sort of synchronously as we're together and what can be conducted asynchronously before or after the time that you're getting together. Some of the tips that we've kind of pulled out to surface to this top here is getting a head start on your meeting. So what I mean by that is setting a goal for your meetings and really mapping out the flow of where you want to start, where you want to end, and how to get your participants through that point. The other area that's really critical here is time boxing. So setting these limits to your discussion activities, particularly in smaller chunks, allows you to really make a great difference in the output of your meetings. Another thing that's really valuable too is rehearsing and running through your meetings that you're doing before you actually conduct them. So a lot of our work is rooted in design thinking, and I love this kind of concept here because it's really this way for us to have a quick, low-risk test of our design to make sure everything is where it needs to be without even having to get into the meeting and not having things working quite right. And the last one here is crafting that agenda and sharing that out. This is about managing those expectations across your team to know what am I stepping into and how do I best be prepared as a team member as I join in. So these are just some things that we like to consider as we're thinking about meeting design. Jumping into meeting facilitation, one of the things that we've seen over and over is facilitating meetings just takes practice and also confidence. So some of the critical questions that we like to consider, again, when we're preparing and facilitating this meeting is what are those desired outcomes, the expected deliverables that are there, and then how can we sequence that to make sure it flows properly. And hold on 1 second. And so, so as you're considering that and how things can be broken up, the other thing as well, kind of leading on that, is how do you engage and follow up with your people at the end after you've finished with your meeting too. There's that follow-on component too. We've talked about before, specifically as you're going through and conducting your meeting is to utilize the video component of your connection whenever you're able to. If we see kind of these three sort of high-level steps of facilitating, particularly in the virtual setting, the first thing, of course, is to orient your participants to your agenda and the plan that you're doing. Just like in any meeting, it's really important to kind of create boundaries and spaces to communicate as well. Because sharing and reporting does look different because our cues and our sequencing may prove difficult when we're not actually in the same room. When we're running our activities, again, driving home video is so critical here, but also we love screen sharing to co-edit documents. This allows us to be able to work in real time and continue to progress the content that we're working on. So thinking about how to really work through that. Sometimes we use breakouts and other tools as well that help us as we go through. One of the things that you may find is attention is an important factor to consider when you're facilitating remote, as the opportunities for multitasking are significantly higher when we're not in the same room. There are some studies that have actually come out as well of linking productivity and output, that they not only decrease, but your IQ can actually drop up to 10 points when you're multitasking during a meeting. So figuring out ways to be able to connect in and link into your participants, and periodically to really get that powerful meeting. And of course, at the end of the meeting, it's really critical to be clear with your documentation, those action plans, whatever form that is, to reflect on what was talked about and really where you can go from that. So we've mentioned and talked about some tools here. Here's another quote from the McKinsey article that I was referencing, that we see the use of effective tools, both virtual and in person, sometimes require a change management effort. Training your teams on how to use them, and even just defining those new ways of working. Some of the sort of key areas that we've thought about when we're looking at technology resources here, you'll see kind of outlined in these bullet points here. The first one here is thinking about how do we think visually, because we can't draw on a whiteboard necessarily. What tools can we use to be able to work on that together? So built in actually into a platform like Zoom, there is a whiteboard function. So you have a whiteboard that you can connect in even in a virtual setting. We also love using a tool called Sprint-based, particularly when we're doing design efforts, coming up with a new solution or product or service. From challenge to solution, it really helps. It really helps to serve as you kind of transfer that knowledge from working on your own, as well as into a collaborative workspace when you do get to come together. A critical component that we also see is being able to share your content and manage that content. So what we like to use a lot of times is Google Drive, but a lot of organizations have their own sort of managing content. Again, it's sharing in a format and managing in a format that your team is able to utilize effectively is really important here. So as we continue, once you're managing that content, having that source of truth, it's also important to stay organized with the content that's there. And so we've seen project management tools such as Airtable or Trello that really help to connect in and support you. We've been using some real-time communication with Zoom, but there's also some sort of asynchronous communication that you might find with Microsoft Teams or Slack or something similar to that. Those will all help you as well. I'm going to jump into this last area here about facilitating collaboration. When geography introduces barriers for working, sometimes we have to be a little bit creative. We've talked about building together using collaborative documents, such as Google Drive. For most people, access is open and barriers to use are incredibly low. And the content can be shared really quickly to make those real-time edits. We've already had an opportunity to unpack gaining consensus using polls or other formats to give your participants an opportunity to quickly provide input and land on decisions. When you're meeting in person, you can use dots to vote or other ways to kind of gain consensus, but sometimes a poll is a great way to get a pulse check of the room to gauge the energy of the group. The last one here, of course, is sharing decisions and actions. So using simple tools to record what we agreed upon, as well as the accountability for actions going forward, help to serve as a source of truth for the team as they disperse after the meeting concludes. I'm going to just briefly show, this is a template that we like to use when we're documenting those key decisions and those action items, right? To be able to link in what happens at the end of the meeting to your tool that you're managing as well. So those actions continue to live on after your meeting has concluded. And with that, I know I've kind of blazed through the tools, but I want to spend a little bit of time for us to test drive. And so we've come up with this sort of challenge to present to our participants who are here joining of how might we improve our remote working capabilities for our team. And the way we want to do that is we're actually going to do a really quick rapid brainstorm, and we're going to put you guys in breakout rooms using Zoom. And so in those breakout rooms, what we want to do is spend some time unpacking what's working, what's not, and what to do differently for each of these categories. One breakout room is going to be looking at running meetings, one is going to be looking at managing content, and one is going to be looking at facilitating collaboration. Mary has just been so helpful to connect in and share the Google slide. This is the document that we want to be working on together. So we'll be editing it together live. This is a sample here on my screen of what you might see, depending on which group that you are placed in. So I have Mary and Jenny from my team as well, who are going to be supporting me as we break off into our breakout rooms really quick, and we'll spend some time, and then we'll get pulled back into our main meeting and wrap up before noon. So you'll see a prompt to join a breakout room. Just go ahead and click that and you'll be popped into your specific breakout room. Well, it looks like most of us have joined back in. I know we're over time, so I do want to go ahead and be respectful of that. But the last thing that you would be able to do as an opportunity we wanted to test out was having one of you guys share your screen. But as we conclude and continue, using the practices and the tools that we've even talked about today, it's really important to spend some time reflecting on what was talked about and use that as an opportunity to think about what you can be doing going forward. So when we think about surveys, there are really two different polls that we use that we talked about. One was built into Zoom, and that's a polling function that is utilized when you go into kind of your back end on your web login for Zoom. The other one was Poll Everywhere. Poll Everywhere is a free software that's available. It integrates into your presentation. It can be on Google Slides. If you use PowerPoint, it can also be integrated in there, and it captures that content and stores that even after you're done. So for example, we could go in and I can open up Poll Everywhere, and we can see all the responses that you guys submitted for the collaborative ways of working that you enjoy. So those are things that really help to kind of link back and reflect on along the way. And yes, Poll Everywhere is free to a certain number of people responding. So if you're facilitating with a group like ours that's not too large, you're able to utilize that. But of course, as any software is, when you expand your number of people, cost does get introduced as well. All right. Thank you all for joining. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Collin.
Thank you.